In this particular season of the Super Friends, what I liked most was Firestorm. I liked the fact that he had a personality, whereas, again, with all due respect, all the other characters, their voices are interchangeable.
Hey, Professor, that Wonder Woman's a real fox.
The concept with Firestorm was to do a very typical teenager. What would happen if a kid who wasn't a science major became a superhero? What would happen if a kid who wasn't the smartest kid on the block got superpowers?
Me? A super friend? You bet!
What Jerry gave us was a teenager that teenagers could recognize.
He's more complex, more troubled, much more like Peter Parker and Spider-Man.
Sometimes it's easier catching crooks than catching up on my studies.
There were two ways that you were supposed to engage kids back then. You were either supposed to put a kid in the cartoon, or you were supposed to emphasize the kid-like qualities, the identifiable kid-like qualities of certain characters that were younger than the rest.
We were breaking the mold of the sort of classic Hanna-Barbera, you gotta have kids, you gotta have a dog dynamic.
The most interesting thing about his character is they use two people in one.
According to a spectral genetic analysis of this photograph, Firestorm's genetic code is composed of quadruple DNA helices. It means that Firestorm appears to be two people in one.
Holy split personalities!
As you can see in the cartoon show, it's very much a reflection of the growing interest in nuclear energy. And clearly that was playing off of that idea. He was, in the comics, he was actually billed as Firestorm, the nuclear man.
It was pretty cool to have a character that I had created end up in a TV cartoon. It was especially cool to have that character turn out as a toy, which I'm a proud collector of a mint-in-the-box edition of Firestorm toy.
Holy switcheroo! We've got to get Apache Chief. Come on!
By the Great Spirit, we must hurry. Ole! Kazi no yo ni hayaku!
You guys sure know how to make an entrance.
Let's talk about ethnicity in Saturday morning cartoons.
It was really important, I think, to get some diversity into the look of who you were seeing on television at the time.
It's not so much that there wasn't ethnicity on Saturday morning animation, but it was sort of weirdly regimented. If you wanted to find black guys, you had to go look at Fat Albert. You had to go look at the Harlem Globetrotters, but you couldn't find any white guys there.
I mean, you can't go through the 60s with the civil rights movement and the counterculture and all that and not be affected.
The networks had come to the realization that they were serving a diverse population.
Holy white walls! We've got to save Superman!
Everything the network did was very ham-fisted.
It's now or never!
There was nothing subtle about anything they did. So consequently, just as you got ham-fisted plots and, kind of ham-fisted handling of superheroes, you got this sort of brute force injection of ethnic characters into Super Friends.
Well, we calmed the waters of that problem.
When you're creating a character, you have to have something to hang your hat on. It can't just be a guy in an outfit who can, has some wacky power. You have to have an emotional component.
The problem is we don't know anything about him.
But these were characters that the network really wanted to promote. And you will find that in most of the stories that feature them, if not all the stories, they're the ones who solve the dilemma.
Now, to return things to normal.
That was incredible, El Dorado. Your holographic image of a black hole did the trick.
Si, amigo. Now to bring Luthor to justice.
Samurai!
You will not be needing this, Curator. Museum hours are over.
The four characters, Apache Chief, Samurai, Black Vulcan, and El Dorado, were four characters that were introduced 2 seasons earlier as Hanna-Barbera was trying to be more pro-social and try to bring more racial groups into the mix.
Are the characters sort of ludicrous and ridiculous? Yes. Are they at a disadvantage because we don't know their backstory? They don't have backstories? Of course. Really, all that they were cartoon character versions of ethnicities.
Uh-oh, amigos. Our troubles are far from over.
And they really were, they really were tokens with a capital T. I mean, they didn't have any personality. They weren't in the background. They weren't in DC Comics.
I couldn't have said, okay, I want to do a story about, Black Vulcan and his angst, because they would have said, well, stop throwing those big words around, buddy.
We have had enough of your bad behavior. Kazi no yo ni hayaku.
As characters, they really they didn't bring anything new to the table. It's not like their heritage somehow played into their powers or played into their MOs.
We must rescue the Wonder Twins in action!
We look at these things today and go, oh, gee, how simplistic those were, but were they really any more simplistic than the depictions of Batman and Superman were? I don't think so. They were about, that was the level that this was working at.
A lot of characters didn't have origins in these cartoon shows. You had to take them at face value. So if kids didn't know who Aquaman was, they just knew he just swam and was king of the ocean.
No, it's funny. I don't know how many fans have come up to me and told me, wow, I really love Black Vulcan. I mean, there was something about him that really caught the imagination of some fans.
Again, that was very much of its time. First off, the notion that you would have to call him Black Vulcan is part of a long-standing comic tradition at that point of identifying our black characters with that honorific to make sure that you know they're black.
Regardless of whether it's stereotypical or not, the major thing is that people are making the effort. And what the effort does, it creates a dialogue. It shows you what you did right, it shows you what you did wrong.
It was the beginning of something good, and we have to kind of look at it that way. Is it ludicrous to look at some of these characters now? Yes, of course. I don't even remember there was some weird phrase that the Indian character said every time, Inokchuk or something like that. I have no idea what that meant.
My sixth sense tells me he is not to be trusted.
It certainly helped open the doors for the next generation of cartoons and the next generation.
Ha! I do believe you have had it, my illustrious friend.
And anything that can help break, that color and race barrier so it's not a bunch of white Justice Leaguers is great.
But it was a good step forward to at least recognize that the world was not composed solely of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males.
Holy Homo sapiens! Welcome back to humanity!
I look back at that period, those early 80s, with superhero shows and the kid audience there, as kind of a quaint time.
In terms of style, I mean, it's a much different era back then. They were aiming for a much younger audience to the point where everything was frankly over-explained. I mean, again, it's almost like illustrated radio. You could sort of close your eyes and still follow the story pretty well.
Holy hairdo, it's a girl!
As writers, we couldn't be sure if the illustrations, if the drawing aspect of it would convey what we were trying to convey.
Merciful Minerva! That ocean liner is about to crash into an iceberg.
The thing about television animation at the time was that it was essentially in the same place where comic books were in the 1950s.
Well, when you're talking about the early 1980s, there's certainly a huge dichotomy between what was being done on Saturday morning television and what was being done in comics.
Comics were really sophisticated at that time and experiencing a real renaissance, and our cartoons were very simple-minded.
It is a little weird that you could sit down with your copy of The Dark Knight Returns and then turn on the TV and then see Adam West as Batman bouncing around in his Bat Doom buggy.
But there's still something about the characters and the idea of superheroes and the good versus evil that even at the most simple level is very satisfying.
I really do think it goes to the strength of the characters, that these characters are so archetypal and so grand and so amazing that you can take them and stretch them in all sorts of different directions and take them to all sorts of generations, and they'll play in any audience.
Well, I hope you've learned you can't compromise with evil.
Right. True freedom can't be bargained for. It must be earned.
I know that now, thanks to you, Super Friends.